She had everything, except love. He had nothing, except a reason to destroy her world. In the quiet hills of Provence, under blooming lavender skies, a forbidden romance was born. But what Claire didn't know was that the man she fell for had a secret. A secret that would burn everything she ever loved. This is not a love story. This is a story about truth, revenge, and the garden that witnessed it all. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's begin. In the rolling hills of southern France, where the golden light kissed the earth and the air smelled faintly of thyme and lavender, stood the Château de Neuve, an estate frozen in time. The mansion rose from the land like a forgotten cathedral, its sandstone walls faded by the Mistral winds, its ivy-covered towers reaching for a sky that never answered. It was a house that once knew laughter. Now, it knew only echoes. Claire de Neuve, 42 years old, lived within its high walls like a portrait come to life, all grace, precision, and porcelain control. Her husband, François de Neuve, had died 2 years earlier in a car accident just outside Paris. He was the king of French fashion, a man who built an empire from nothing, only to leave it all behind in the blink of an eye. The press clung to the tragedy for weeks. They called Claire the Ice Widow, the last lady of the old world, and even, mockingly, the queen without a throne. But Claire never answered back. She had disappeared from the world just as quickly as François had. No more Paris galas, no more magazine interviews. She retreated into her estate in Provence, surrounded by vineyards, gardens, and silence. Her days were composed of rituals: coffee at 7, walking the grounds at 9, tea at 4, sleeping by 10. Controlled, predictable, sterile. And yet, the garden was dying. Despite the fortune she spent on contractors, landscapers, and seasonal workers, the roses browned early, the lemon trees bore no fruit, and the lavender wilted before summer. It was as if the soil itself was mourning something. Or someone. One morning in May, Claire stood barefoot in her kitchen, espresso cup in hand, staring through the wide window that overlooked the east garden. The fog was lifting, slow and deliberate, revealing the edges of the vineyard like secrets being whispered. She noticed movement near the trellis of white jasmine. A man. Tall. Broad shoulders. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, sleeves rolled to the elbows, arms taut as he dug into the earth with a spade. He moved with the certainty of someone who knew the land better than it knew itself. Claire narrowed her eyes. She hadn't approved any new hires. "Simone," she called to her housekeeper. "Who is that man?" Simone, a quiet woman with 30 years of service, appeared with hesitation. He said Monsieur Levine from the landscaping firm sent him. A replacement for Jacques, temporarily. "I never spoke to Levine. Why wasn't I told?" Simone hesitated. He showed up yesterday. He said he was already briefed. "I was going to tell you." Claire set down her cup. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the marble counter. "Get my shoes." She walked out, heels clicking on the old stone path. The sun had begun to climb, casting a gold light over the garden. As she approached, the man looked up. He didn't flinch, didn't bow, didn't apologize. Instead, he smiled faintly, not with charm but with knowledge. As if he already knew she'd come. As if he were waiting. "You're trespassing," she said in crisp, upper-class French. He leaned on his shovel and tilted his head slightly. "Then it's the most beautiful prison I've ever been in, madam." She blinked. That was not the answer she expected. "I didn't authorize your presence." "Understood," he said. "But the garden asked for help." "I just answered." She stared at him. His skin was sun-warmed, his dark hair tied back at the nape. A thin scar ran down his left cheek, almost hidden beneath stubble. His boots were muddy, his shirt torn near the hem. But his eyes, pale green, almost gray, were still and defiant. "What's your name?" she asked. "Julien," he replied. "Julien Marchand." Claire took one breath. Then another. You may stay until I speak to Levine. Not a moment longer. He nodded once and returned to digging. As if she had said nothing of consequence. She turned and walked away, heart uncomfortably alert. Something about him was off. Not threatening, but not harmless either. A kind of calm that came from surviving storms. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the dark, her silk sheets cold against her skin, and her thoughts returning again and again to the man in the garden. The way he stood with complete confidence in a place that wasn't his. The way he looked at her, not like a woman to be impressed, but like a woman to be measured. She rose from bed and padded barefoot across the floor to the window. The vineyard lay in darkness, the jasmine trellis barely visible in the moonlight. She opened the window, and for the first time in weeks, she smelled lavender. Not the perfume she kept in her drawer. Real lavender. Wild. Earthy. Alive. She closed her eyes. And for a moment, just one, she forgot she was alone. The next morning, Claire woke before dawn. The air in her bedroom was cold, touched by the mistral winds that often swept through the hills of Provence. She wrapped herself in a long cream robe and descended the grand staircase barefoot, the marble tiles cool against her feet. Outside, the horizon was just beginning to blush with the early light of a Provençal sunrise. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the antique machine in the kitchen. As the espresso steamed in her hand, she walked once more to the window. And there he was again. Julien. Digging. Planting. Weeding. Already working before anyone else in the house had even stirred. He moved like a man who didn't care who was watching. Slow, strong, methodical. The garden, for the first time in years, seemed to respond. A few of the roses that had refused to bloom now stood taller. The jasmine vines no longer hung like dying limbs. Claire took another sip of coffee, staring at him. It wasn't just his body, though there was something undeniably magnetic about his physicality. It was the silence around him. A silence that wasn't empty, but purposeful. He didn't fill it with chatter or performance. He let the earth speak first. Later that day, Claire called Monsieur Levine. He confirmed that Julien had indeed been sent by him, a last-minute replacement, highly recommended by one of their retiring experts. He doesn't speak much, Levine had said. But he works miracles. Claire almost laughed. Miracles. On this land. She thanked him coldly and hung up. From that moment, she stopped fighting his presence. Julien became a shadow in the garden. Always around. Always working. He never came inside unless instructed. He never touched what wasn't his. But he noticed everything. One afternoon, as Claire returned from the village in her vintage cream-colored Citroën, she passed him by the edge of the vineyard. He didn't look up. He simply lifted a hand to shield his eyes from the sun and returned to pruning. "Bonjour, madame," he murmured as she passed. There was no need for more. That evening, Claire joined her housekeeper for tea in the courtyard. She asked, as if casually, "What do you know about the new gardener?" Simone looked thoughtful. "He's quiet. Eats very little. Sleeps in the cottage by the south wall. Never complains. Never asks for anything. Strange, that one. Strange. He reads. Real books. Philosophy, I think. He walks at night sometimes. Just walks. Like a ghost." Claire raised an eyebrow. "He reads philosophy?" Simone nodded. "Yesterday, I saw him with Camus. Before that, Pascal." Claire said nothing more. But the next day, she left a book on the old stone bench near the lavender, L'Étranger by Albert Camus. It was her late husband's copy, leather-bound, pages annotated with arrogance and intellect. That evening, the book was gone. The next morning, it was back, but now with a bookmark. A pressed violet inside. Claire didn't mention it. Neither did he. But a thread had been tied between them, silent, invisible, unmistakable. One late afternoon, as clouds began to gather over the vineyard, Julien approached the edge of the terrace where Claire was sitting, notebook in hand, trying to sketch. The pages were mostly blank. He wiped the dirt from his hands, not bothering with gloves. "You've been trying to draw that olive tree for 2 days," he said. Claire looked up, surprised. "You've been watching me? I work near it." She lifted an eyebrow. "And you're an art critic now?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I just think, maybe you're trying to draw something that doesn't want to be captured." She blinked. "Trees are like people. They carry their past in their shape. Some don't like being looked at too closely." Claire held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then she closed her notebook. "Have you always been a gardener?" Julien shrugged. "Once, I thought I would be a soldier. But the world had other ideas." She nodded slowly. "War. Something like it." Silence stretched between them. The wind picked up, rustling the pages of her notebook. Julien turned to go, but paused. "The soil here is strange," he said, almost to himself. Claire tilted her head. "Strange how?" "It resists," he said. "But if you're patient, it gives in." She said nothing. He walked away. That night, Claire stood in front of the mirror in her bathroom. She stared at her reflection, the lines around her mouth, the stillness in her eyes, the small scar near her collarbone that no one had touched in years. She ran a brush through her hair slowly. Downstairs, she heard the front door creak open. Footsteps, not hers. A pause. Then the door closed again. No one should have entered. She moved quickly, barefoot again, and looked over the banister. The foyer was empty. But on the small wooden table near the entrance, a single item lay. A violet. Pressed. Fresh. Deliberate. She didn't ask questions. She simply picked it up. Claire kept the violet. She placed it delicately inside the pages of her journal, next to a sketch of the olive tree she still couldn't quite capture. It wasn't just a flower. It was a message, a gesture that spoke louder than any words Julien might have used. Over the next few days, something shifted between them. Nothing was said, nothing confessed. But the way their paths crossed in the garden felt different. Their silences grew thicker, like clouds before a storm. When Claire passed him on her morning walks, he'd pause, remove his glove, and nod. When she sat on the bench near the rose bushes, he'd trim them more gently, his eyes flickering toward her every so often. Always quick, always careful. One evening, after a light rain, Claire wandered outside in slippers and a shawl, drawn by the smell of wet earth and roses in bloom. She found Julien in the orchard, shirt damp with sweat and rain, sleeves pushed to his elbows, skin shining faintly under the dusk. "You work too late," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Nature doesn't punch a clock." She approached slowly, arms folded. "You never rest." "I do," he said. "Just not when I'm here." Claire tilted her head. "What does that mean?" Julien finally stood upright, leaning against a tree. He wiped his brow, eyes unreadable. "It means this place demands something. And I've never liked leaving a job half done." Claire's breath caught. There was something in his voice, not anger, but intensity. As if he were planting more than just flowers. As if each shovel of earth carried a secret beneath it. "Do you have family, Julien?" He hesitated. "Not anymore." "Friends. Not the kind who write letters." Claire nodded, but inside, something ached. She knew loneliness. And she recognized it now in him, reflected back like a distorted mirror. The next morning, she made a decision. She instructed Simone to prepare a small dinner for 2. Simple. Intimate. Set on the terrace under the pergola, surrounded by hanging wisteria and candles. It had been years since the table was used for anything other than her own tea and silence. At sunset, she changed, slipping into a long navy dress, loose at the shoulders, her hair pinned up with care. She wore no perfume. Just the natural scent of her skin, warmed by the sun and something else she refused to name. When Julien returned from the far field, he found the table waiting, and Claire beside it. She didn't speak, just nodded toward the seat across from hers. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he removed his gloves and sat. They ate in silence for the first few minutes. Grilled vegetables, goat cheese, rose from the vineyard she barely remembered owning. As the candles flickered between them, Claire finally broke the silence. "You know," she said, "you're the first person to sit at this table with me since Francois died." Julien looked at her carefully. "I don't take that lightly. I didn't say it for your benefit. I know." Another pause. She studied him now under softer light. The angles of his face, the small scar near his jaw, the veins in his forearms as he lifted the wine glass. "You're not like the others," she said. He chuckled faintly. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a warning." Julien leaned forward. "And yet, here we are." Their eyes locked. Then Claire stood. "I want to show you something." She walked into the house, barefoot on marble, and he followed. Through the halls, past oil paintings and heavy drapes, to a small room near the back, her husband's study. Untouched since his death. She opened the door. The room smelled of leather and paper. The desk was still covered in books, the globe still open to South America, where Francois had dreamed of opening another boutique. Claire walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a photo album. "He built everything," she said. "The brand, the chateau, the image of the perfect life. And I played my part." Julien stepped closer. "You weren't happy." She didn't answer. She handed him the album. Inside were glossy photos, runways in Paris, press events in Milan, Claire in gowns worth more than small houses. Always smiling. Always polished. "But behind the smiles?" she asked. "I don't see you in any of these," Julien said. She looked at him. Really looked. And then, without warning, she kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't planned. It was need. Years of it. He didn't pull away. His hands rose slowly, not to grab her, but to hold her face like something fragile. Something forbidden. They didn't make it past the doorway. Later, as she lay against his chest in the guest room he had never used until now, Julien whispered into her hair, "You shouldn't trust me." Claire lifted her head. "Why?" He didn't answer. She watched him in the dim light, eyes open, jaw clenched, heart somewhere far away. She remembered what he said the other day. "The soil here is strange, but if you're patient, it gives in." And she began to wonder, had she just given in? Or was she already being buried? The next morning, Claire awoke alone. The sheets beside her were cold. The guest room window was open, letting in the early scent of cypress and damp earth. Julien had already gone. She sat up, wrapping herself in the bedsheet, the air pressing coolly against her bare skin. A strange calm had settled over her. Not peace, something quieter. The kind of calm that comes before a landslide. She found a note on the nightstand. Folded. Blank on the outside. Inside. "Thank you for not asking me to stay." There was no signature. Just his careful handwriting. Controlled. Sharp. Like a man used to writing only when absolutely necessary. Claire dressed and returned to the main house. The staff went about their duties as if nothing had changed, because to them, nothing had. Simone offered her tea. Claire accepted it. At noon, she found Julien by the rose garden, sleeves rolled, humming a tune she didn't recognize. "You left early," she said. "I had work," he replied without turning. "Is that what it was?" Julien finally looked at her. His expression was unreadable. What else would it be? Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You left a note." He nodded. It felt appropriate. "Appropriate?" she echoed, surprised by the coldness. Julien paused. "You don't know me, Claire. You think I don't know what loneliness looks like. He stared at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain. Maybe guilt. I've lived with ghosts for years, she continued. Last night wasn't a mistake. He looked away. Even ghosts know better than to love the living. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she returned to the house and buried herself in her sketchbook. But every line she drew curved toward him, his hands, his face, the scar on his cheek. She couldn't stop it. That night, Julien didn't come inside. But the next morning, a small basket of early peaches appeared on her windowsill. No note. No explanation. She smiled. Days passed. Their encounters became more frequent, less restrained. Glances stretched longer. Words lingered in the air. One evening, he walked her back to the chateau from the vineyard path, their fingers brushing briefly. She didn't pull away. I never knew silence could be so loud, Claire whispered as they stopped beneath an old fig tree. Julien didn't respond. But he leaned in and kissed her, slow, deliberate, reverent. They became careful, or so they thought. One afternoon, while walking the edge of the vineyard, Claire overheard two of the maids whispering. "He's not what he seems," one said. "The gardener." She froze behind the cypress hedge. "Yes." Simone said she saw him near the office wing last night. After hours. No one should have been there. And he was holding something. A file. He put it in his jacket when he saw her. Claire stepped into view. The maids fell silent, curtsied quickly and scurried off. She said nothing. But inside, something shifted. That night, after the house fell silent, Claire crept into her husband's old office. The smell of wood polish and dust still clung to the shelves. She checked the cabinet drawers, one by one. Nothing seemed missing, until she opened the drawer labeled Archives, Legal 2012 to 2017. One folder was gone. Her breath caught. The next morning, she confronted him. He was trimming lavender near the west wall. "Julien," she said, firm. He looked up. "Madam, don't madam me." He stood slowly, hands dirty, sleeves rolled high. "You were in the office." Julien didn't flinch. "I was looking for you. You were holding a file." He nodded. "It had your name on it. That doesn't give you the right." "No," he agreed, brushing soil from his hands. "But it gave me a reason." Claire's heart pounded. What was in it? Julien looked at her carefully. Contracts. Factory ownership. Property acquisitions. "Why would that interest you?" Silence. Then he said, "Because some of those factories weren't built on empty land." Claire stared. He continued, "Your husband took land from people who had no voice, no lawyers, no cameras, just soil under their nails. You don't know that. I lived it." The words struck like a stone. Julien stepped closer. "You think I came here for a job? For your roses?" Claire stepped back. "I came here," he whispered, "because this land was taken from someone I loved." She tried to speak, but the words failed. Julien looked at her, not with hatred, but with something worse, sorrow. "I didn't expect to feel anything for you," he said. "But I did. And now, that makes everything harder." He turned and walked away, leaving Claire alone beneath the withering lavender. That night, she didn't sleep. The house felt different now. Hollow in a new way. Every sound, a door creaking, a branch tapping the window, echoed with unease. She sat on the edge of her bed, trying to understand how she hadn't seen it. How she'd let herself be drawn in by a man who had come not to love her, but to judge her. But another part of her, the part that still remembered the way he touched her cheek, the way he smelled of rosemary and rain, refused to let go. In the morning, she returned to the garden. The peach trees were stripped bare. The basket was gone. And Julien was nowhere to be found. The garden had never been quieter. The lavender drooped. The wind moved without sound. Even the bees, once frantic around the rosemary, seemed to avoid the earth. Claire stood alone by the peach tree, the one Julien had tended with such reverence, now stripped bare. No fruit, no basket, no sign of him. For the first time in weeks, she entered the garden not as its mistress, but as its ghost. Julien was gone. She asked Simone, the housekeeper. "No one's seen him," she replied, eyes narrowed. "His things are still in the cottage. But he hasn't been back since yesterday morning." Claire didn't answer. She walked, slowly, to the gardener's cottage near the south wall, a small stone house with ivy crawling across the roof. She pushed the door open. Inside, it was immaculate. Too immaculate. A bed, made tightly. A chair. A worn leather backpack hanging on a nail. A small stack of books on the table. Camus. Sartre. A notebook. She hesitated, then opened the notebook. No names. No dates. Just handwritten passages in French and Latin. One stood out, underlined. "Those who forget what was taken from them are doomed to serve those who took it." Her throat tightened. She flipped to the back. There, a folded document, an old black and white photo of a group of laborers standing in front of a factory. Sunburned faces, tired eyes. On the back, a name was scribbled, Marchand. Marcel. 1994. Alls. The name hit her like a punch. Marcel Marchand. Julien's father? She returned to the chateau and went straight to the archives. Her late husband's obsession with record-keeping had turned their basement into a private library of business history. Rows and rows of binders, folders, and sealed boxes. Claire ran her fingers over the labels. Alls. 1994. She found it. Inside were contracts, stamped and notarized. François Deneuve had purchased a plot of land just outside Alls, cheap, undervalued, from a group of smallholders who lacked legal representation. It was turned into a textile plant within 6 months. The land had been forcibly seized through quiet legal maneuvers. Among the documents, she found an article clipping from a local paper. Fire at textile plant kills 2. Injures 4. Among the dead, Marcel Marchand, 38. Claire sat back, stunned. It wasn't just a business deal. It was blood. Julien had come to her house, her bed, not by accident. He was the son of the man her husband had destroyed. Suddenly, every look, every silence, every carefully chosen word came crashing back. The way he studied the land. The photo album he lingered on. The scar on his cheek. He hadn't been flirting. He had been hunting. But something still didn't make sense. If Julien had come for revenge, why the gentleness? Why the hesitation? Why the peaches? She closed the file and returned to the garden. The soil crunched under her heels. The air felt heavier. That night, unable to sleep, Claire went back to the gardener's cottage. She sat on his bed, looked again at the books. One had a folded paper inside, not a note this time, but a photograph of her, taken from a distance, black and white, grainy. She was standing on the terrace, unaware, holding her sketchbook. She pressed the photo to her chest. Then she wept. The next morning, a letter arrived. No stamp. Just slipped beneath the grand wooden door. She opened it slowly. Recognized the handwriting immediately. Claire. If I were a better man, I would have done what I came here to do. But something in you made me pause. Not your beauty. Not your money. Something older. Something true. You reminded me of my mother. She had hands like yours. Always in the soil. Always searching for something she couldn't name. I didn't mean to hurt you. I meant to hurt a name. A history. But then I saw you weren't the history. You were just the soil it grew from. And maybe soil can heal. I'm leaving now. But I left one thing for you, where the roses bloom again. If you dig there, you'll understand. J. Claire stood still for a long time. Then she walked out into the garden, still in her robe, ignoring Simone's concerned eyes. She went to the rose garden, where the new yellow roses had bloomed impossibly fast under Julien's care. She picked up a trowel and knelt in the dirt, hands trembling. The soil was soft, recently disturbed. She dug. 3 inches down, her fingers brushed metal. A small tin box. Inside, documents. Photocopies. Receipts. Letters signed by her husband. Proof of payoffs. Records of suppressed worker injuries. Legal threats. A cover-up of the Alls fire. François had built an empire on stolen land, broken backs, and silence. Julien had come to break that silence. And now Claire was holding it all. That night, she stared at the documents for hours. Outside, a storm rolled in. Inside, Claire lit a match and burned the papers. Not to destroy the truth, but to release it. She stood at the window, watching the fire crackle in the fireplace. The rain began to fall. The lavender bent. The fig trees shook. She whispered to herself, like a prayer, "I see you now." The storm raged through the night. Thunder rolled over the hills of Provence like the beating of ancient war drums. Trees bowed beneath the wind. Rain hammered the windows of Chateau de Neuve in sheets. But Claire didn't move from her spot by the fire. She watched the flames dance, the remnants of Julien's evidence slowly curling into ash. Her hands smelled of smoke and earth. Her robe was damp from digging. And yet, she felt no guilt, no fear, only clarity. She now understood that everything she had, the vineyards, the fortune, the chateau itself, stood on a graveyard of silence. Her husband had built his empire with the elegance of a king and the cruelty of a thief. And Julien had come to bury the legacy. Not her. Never her. Just after midnight, as the fire crackled low and the storm softened to a whisper, Claire heard a knock at the kitchen door. Soft, steady, familiar. She froze. Another knock. She rose slowly, crossing the marble floor barefoot. She opened the door. There he was. Julien. Soaked to the bone, hair clinging to his forehead, eyes darker than she remembered. His jaw was clenched, but his hands were empty. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Finally, she stepped aside. He entered, dripping water onto the tiles. His boots echoed with each step. She followed him to the main hall, where the chandelier above them swayed ever so slightly from the wind beyond the walls. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said. "I didn't plan to," he replied. "But I had to know." "Know what?" "If you read it. If you dug." Claire nodded. "I did." He looked down. She walked past him toward the fireplace, where the ashes still glowed faintly. Julien followed her gaze. "You burned them," he said quietly. "I released them." Julien's expression didn't change, but something inside him shifted. "Why?" he asked. "You could have turned them in, exposed everything, walked away clean." Claire turned to face him. "And what? Let the world eat you alive in court? Watch you disappear like your father?" Julien flinched. "I know who he was now," she continued. "Marcel Marchand. Killed in a fire my husband's company tried to erase." Julien's voice was barely audible. "They didn't even send flowers." Claire swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." He looked at her. "It's not your apology to make. I know. But I make it anyway." Julien stepped closer. "I didn't expect to feel anything here," he said. "Least of all, for you." Claire studied his face. His vulnerability. The crack in his armor. "You came here to hurt me," she whispered. He shook his head. "I came here to destroy a legacy. But you weren't in the plan." Silence stretched between them. The storm outside was dying now. Just wind and whispers. Claire walked toward the window, pressing her hand to the cold glass. "I used to think this place was a sanctuary," she said. But maybe it's just a monument to denial. Julien stood behind her. Then leave it. She turned, surprised. What? Come with me. Claire laughed, short and bitter. Go where, Julien? To what life? To a life that isn't built on someone else's bones. She shook her head. You think I can just walk away from all of this? From the staff, the land, the press? Yes, he said, stepping closer. Because it's not your legacy. You're not your husband. Claire looked at him, and for a moment, she wanted to say yes. She wanted to step into the unknown, to follow this man with hands of earth and eyes of storm. But something held her back. Fear, loyalty, or something older, something she couldn't name? Julien saw it in her eyes. You're afraid of being free, he said. She didn't deny it. Instead, she asked, if we run, what happens when they come after us? When they dig into your past? Julien looked down. Then let them. I've lived with ghosts my whole life. One more won't kill me. Claire stepped closer. Their foreheads touched. They stood like that for a long time, not lovers, not enemies. Just two souls lost in the wreckage of history. Then she whispered, stay. Just for tonight. Julien nodded. She led him upstairs, past the portraits, past the judgments. In her room, they undressed without ceremony, without seduction, just truth. Their bodies met like wounded animals finding shelter. No words, no promises, only breath. Only now. When morning came, Julien was already gone. But this time, he left no note. Just one final gesture. In the garden, beneath the olive tree she'd never managed to draw, a new plant had been placed. A single white rose. Still wet with dew. Still trembling from the storm. The white rose stood alone in the soil, untouched by boots or hands. Claire stared at it from the window for what felt like hours. It was a symbol, a gift, a goodbye. And yet, it refused to wilt. Like something planted not just to say farewell, but to take root. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She walked its halls like a stranger, pausing at doors, touching furniture, reopening old drawers that hadn't been opened since François died. Each item felt lighter now, as if the secrets they carried had finally exhaled. By mid-morning, Claire made a decision. She called her lawyer in Paris. I want to sell the vineyards, she said. A long silence on the line. Madame Deneuve, are you certain? I've never been more certain. Liquidate them. Quietly. Discreetly. And the chateau? Not yet. She hung up before hearing his reply. By sunset, the staff had heard the whispers. Simone confronted her in the kitchen, hands folded, voice trembling with concern. Madam, she began, people are talking. Let them, Claire replied softly. They say the gardener. Claire raised a hand. He's not the story. He never was. But even as she said it, she felt the cracks forming. The village was small. Gossip moved like wildfire. The name Marchand had already surfaced in town. Someone had recognized him, not from newspapers or history, but from a police report. An old mugshot. A protest in Marseille. A night gone wrong. Julien had a record. And it was no longer a secret. That night, Claire waited in the garden. She sat on the old stone bench near the olive tree, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, listening to the frogs in the distance, the rustling of wind through the grapevines, the breath of a world on edge. He arrived just before midnight, stepping out of the dark like a memory. You've been found, she said. Julien nodded. I know. They're asking questions. I expected they would. You should leave. He looked at her, jaw clenched. I have nowhere else to go. Yes, you do. He walked closer, standing in front of her. I didn't come to run, Claire. Then what did you come to do? To finish it. A pause. She rose slowly, eyes locked with his. You told me once that you didn't come here for me, she said. But now I'm the only thing left standing between you and the world. Julien stepped back. And I won't let you fall with me. Claire grabbed his wrist. Then don't do this. Don't make yourself a martyr for something that's already in ashes. But he was shaking his head. There's someone else. Someone who was part of it. A man named Julien Aubrin. He handled the contracts for your husband. He's the one who made the All's fire disappear. Claire froze. Julien Aubrin. Francois's oldest associate. His so-called legal hammer. He still lives in Lyon, Julien continued. Still practices. Still silences. If I don't do something. Claire cut him off. If you go after him, Julien, they'll bury you. This time for good. He looked away. Then let them. Claire pulled him back. You're not your father. Julien met her eyes. But I carry his name. That night, they made love again. Not with desperation, but with finality. Like two souls trying to memorize each other's weight before the tide pulls one of them away. In the morning, Julien was gone. Again. But this time, he took nothing, except her sketch of the olive tree. Claire found the page missing in her notebook, a faint imprint left behind. She knew where he had gone. She drove to Lyon. The city felt colder than she remembered. Cleaner. But beneath the glass buildings and cafes, she could still smell the smoke of old sins. Julien Aubrin's office was tucked into an elegant stone building near Place Bellecour. Claire stood across the street, heart pounding, watching the entrance like it might open and deliver a verdict. And then she saw him. Julien. Waiting in the alley beside the office. Hood up. Hands buried in his coat pockets. Not angry. Just still. She crossed quickly. What are you doing? She hissed. He didn't look at her. Finishing it. You'll be arrested. He nodded. Or worse. I've accepted that. Claire stepped in front of him. Then let me do it. Now he looked at her. What? I'm the widow. I'm the name. Let me be the one to bring him down. He'll answer my call. No. Yes, she said, voice sharp. You're not the only one with ghosts. And I'm done being haunted. Julien didn't argue. He simply pressed the sketch into her hand, the olive tree she could never draw, now complete. You saw it, she whispered. You just needed someone to show you how. They kissed, one last time. Then Claire entered the building alone. Julien Aubrin stood at his window, reading a file. He turned as she entered, surprised but composed. Claire, he said, smiling. What a surprise. She closed the door behind her, and for the first time in her life, she raised her voice. Claire sat in front of Julien Aubrin, and for the first time in decades, she didn't feel like a woman in mourning. She felt like a weapon. Lucien, ever polished in his tailored gray suit, closed the folder in front of him with casual arrogance. Claire, he said, smiling like a wolf. You should have called. We could have done this over wine. I'm not here for wine, she replied coldly. No. Then let me guess. You've had an awakening. She placed a manila envelope on the table between them. Inside, copies, emails, receipts, contracts from the All's acquisition. The ones she had burned, but not before scanning. Lucien's smile faltered. Where did you get this? He asked. Claire leaned forward. Your mistake was thinking I never looked. He closed the envelope slowly. You're threatening the legacy of a man who built you an empire. He built it with blood. Lucien's voice dropped. Be careful, Claire. I was. For 20 years. He stood. You don't understand what you're stepping into. She stood, too. I understand it perfectly. The silence. The machinery. The money that moves faster than truth. Lucien looked at her long and hard. Then, what do you want? Claire answered without blinking. I want it to end. The following days unfolded like a landslide. The documents made their way to a journalist Claire trusted, a woman she'd once dismissed in a fashion interview as too idealistic. Now, she was the only one Claire believed would print the truth without selling it. Within 72 hours, headlines flooded the French media. Widow of fashion tycoon exposes industrial cover-up. All's fire re-examined after 30 years. Legal titan Lucien Aubrin under investigation. It spread like wildfire. TV stations, radio, social media. The Deneuve name became toxic overnight. And with it, Claire. Calls stopped. Friends vanished. The vineyard buyers pulled out. Anonymous threats arrived in the mail. And Julien, gone. No messages. No letters. No white rose on the windowsill. Claire filed a police request to trace him, under the false pretense of needing to terminate his employment. She was told there were no records of anyone named Julien Marchand employed under that name in the last 5 years. He had vanished as silently as he'd arrived. One night, she stood in the garden again, barefoot in the cold soil, beneath a moon pale as chalk. The olive tree stood tall, still bearing its twisted branches. Her sketchbook, now empty again, lay in her lap. She whispered into the wind. I finished it. But the wind did not answer. A month passed. Then another. The investigations against Lucien proceeded, slowly, as all things legal do. The press turned its eyes elsewhere. The heat cooled. The public moved on. But Claire didn't. She sold the estate. Quietly. The chateau, the gardens, the vineyards, all of it. She kept one thing, the gardener's cottage. It was small, humble, but it was hers. There, she planted white roses. Not for Julien. Not even for Marcel. But for herself. To remind her that something had bloomed inside her. Too late to save the past, but just in time to claim the present. One morning, while pruning the vines behind the cottage, she noticed something tucked beneath the soil near the roots of the olive tree. A sealed envelope. Weathered, but intact. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Claire. I left because if I stayed, you would have had to choose between loving me and surviving the storm I brought. You chose truth. And that means I didn't fail. Don't look for me. But if you ever stand in front of the olive tree and feel the wind pause, I'm still listening. J. Claire pressed the letter to her chest. And for the first time in months, she cried. Not from pain, but from gratitude. She had been used. She had been deceived. But she had also been awakened. And for a woman raised in a world of perfection and quiet repression, that was the rarest kind of freedom. In the weeks that followed, she began drawing again. Not olive trees. Not the chateau. But people. Women. Workers. Hands in the soil. Hands like her own. She sent her first collection of charcoal sketches anonymously to a small museum in Alls. It was accepted. No name. Just a title scrawled beneath each one. What the soil remembers. No one knew it was her. And that, she realized, was the only legacy she ever truly wanted. Spring had returned to Provence like a memory, slow, reluctant, and heavy with scent. Claire now lived full-time in the gardener's cottage. The chateau, sold quietly to a foreign conglomerate, stood in the distance like an old monarch stripped of power. She rarely looked at it. Too many ghosts in those windows. Too many shadows in the curtains. The garden around her, though once broken, now bloomed with quiet intention. Lavender, sage, and rows of white roses that swayed gently in the mistral winds. But one thought kept returning. Alls. She'd seen the name in documents, on burned contracts, in Julien's buried letter. It was the place where the fire happened. Where his father died. Where François Deneuve planted the seeds of his empire in stolen soil. So one morning, Claire went. She didn't call anyone. She didn't pack much. She simply drove, alone, along the familiar roads of southern France. No GPS. No distractions. Just the hum of the car and the weight of unfinished business pressing into her chest like a stone. She arrived in Alls just before dusk. The city was small, old, and alive in the way that only ancient cities can be. Children kicked soccer balls in alleyways. Tourists wandered through cobblestone streets with cameras and gelato. But Claire didn't stop for any of it. She drove past the cafes, the train station, the central square. She followed a road that curved down into an industrial area long forgotten by the rest of the world. There, at the end of a cracked and weed-covered street, she found what she was looking for. The ruins of the old textile factory. The building had partially collapsed. Its walls were scorched, sagging inward, overtaken by moss and rust. The gate hung off one hinge. Claire stepped through without hesitation. Inside, it smelled of wet stone, decay, and memory. She walked slowly, stepping over shattered bricks, twisted metal, and bits of glass that crunched beneath her boots. This was where it happened. The fire. The cover-up. The silence. The beginning of everything. And then she saw it. On the last intact wall, beneath the remains of a staircase, was a mural. Hand-drawn in charcoal. Faded, but still visible. 4 faces. All men. All with eyes closed. All peaceful. At the center, in larger letters, was a name. Marcel Marchand. 1956 to 1994. Claire stopped breathing. She dropped to her knees, tears welling before she realized they had come. There was no plaque. No flowers. No newspaper clipping. Only this wall. And below it, written in small, careful handwriting. Here rests no body, but all truth. She reached into her coat and pulled out a dried white rose she had brought from the garden. She laid it gently beneath the mural. Then whispered, "Merci." For a moment, she looked around. Half hoping, half fearing. Would he be there? Julien. Watching from the shadows. Leaning in a doorway. Walking through the broken light like a ghost in boots and memory. But he wasn't. And somehow, she knew, he wouldn't be. She closed her eyes. Let the silence wash over her. No music. No birds. Just wind and grief. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A glimmer of white paper peeking from beneath a fallen beam near the corner of the wall. Curious, Claire knelt and pulled it free. An envelope. Old. Weathered. Unsigned. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single page. Some truths are planted. Others grow wild. But all, in time, rise to the light. J. Claire held the letter to her chest. It didn't say where he was. Or whether he was alive. Or if he'd ever come back. But it didn't need to. She understood now. He had left something behind. Not just secrets, not just pain, but change. Real change. And like any gardener worth his salt, he didn't stay to admire what he'd planted. He trusted the soil to carry it forward. She returned to the car in silence. As she drove back through Alls, the sun sank behind the rooftops, painting the sky in shades of lavender and rust. She didn't stop at any shops. Didn't look at the tourists. She had everything she needed. A name. A truth. A final letter. And the knowledge that even love born in the shadows can shape the light. Weeks passed like whispers through the old vineyards. Claire remained in the gardener's cottage, where silence was not absence, it was presence. A presence she could breathe. The grand chateau stood high above her like a monument to a life that no longer existed. She hadn't stepped foot inside since the day she signed the final papers. Let the new owners chase their legacy. Hers was buried in the soil now. Her world had shrunk to the garden. A few tools. A few books. A teapot. She had started sketching again, not with the ambition of capturing something perfect, but to remember how things felt before they vanished. She didn't miss the noise. She missed only one voice. Some mornings she thought she heard footsteps along the gravel path behind the cottage. Other days she swore she saw movement between the trees. She never went to check. She feared it wouldn't be him, and feared more that it would. One such morning, she woke before dawn. The dream she had was sharp, vivid images of fire licking through vineyard rows, of a hand pressed to glass, of a voice calling her name through smoke. But when she opened her eyes, there was only mist and silence. She wrapped herself in her robe and stepped outside. The olive tree stood where it always had, patient, gnarled, and immortal. Its roots spread wide, like veins of memory beneath the garden. Claire knelt beside it, her fingers digging into the damp earth. In her palm, her wedding ring. It had weighed on her finger for too many years. A relic of a version of herself that belonged to someone else. She whispered, "I release you," and buried it beneath the roots. As she rose, the wind shifted. Then, the sound. A car engine. Slow. Unfamiliar. She turned, instantly alert. No one used that road. There had been no deliveries in months. She didn't even receive mail here anymore. The vehicle emerged through the fog like a shadow, black, unmarked, elegant in a way that made her stomach twist. It came to a stop 15 meters away. Claire didn't move. Her heart raced, pounding against her ribs like a bird against a cage. The engine idled, then stopped. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then, the back door opened. A man stepped out. He wore black, impeccably tailored, gloves, no tie, no visible badge. His face was pale and unreadable, carved from precision and habit. He moved without urgency, as if time belonged to him. He carried a leather case. Claire did not speak. He approached her slowly. When he stood before her, he said simply, "Madame Deneuve." Her voice was a breath. Yes. He opened the case. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a single item. An old silver pocket watch. Its face was cracked. Its chain rusted. Its surface scorched and blackened, but unmistakable. Claire staggered back a step. She knew it. Every line. Every scratch. Francois's watch. But not just his. Julien's too. The man reached into his coat and handed her a folded slip of paper. His gloved fingers didn't tremble. Hers did. She unfolded it. Julien Marchand, presumed dead. Incident, explosion near Alls. 2 unidentified individuals pursued the subject. Fire consumed the site. No survivors. No remains recovered. Personal effects found buried beneath a flat stone. Claire couldn't breathe. The man said nothing more. He did not comfort. He did not explain. He turned. She tried to find her voice. "Wait. Who sent you?" No reply. He stepped back into the car, closed the door, and drove away, silent as a memory. No dust. No tracks. No sound. Just absence. She stood frozen, watch in hand, the weight of it unbearable. The back panel had been cracked open slightly. She ran her thumb over it and pushed. Inside, etched with a trembling tool, words in Julien's hand. "Not all seeds are meant to bloom where they're planted." Her knees buckled. She sank to the ground beside the olive tree, the soil still soft where she had buried her ring. Tears welled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Her fingers touched the earth, searching for something to anchor her. Then, she saw it. Pushing through the soil. Small. Green. New. A violet. Impossible. Delicate. Alive. Julien's flower. She blinked. It hadn't been there before. She would have seen it. She knew this garden. And yet, it stood. Alive. Breathing. Thriving in the same soil where she'd buried her marriage, her guilt, and her illusions. She looked around. Slowly. Sharply. Her voice was a whisper. "Julien." Nothing. Only the wind. But then, a sensation. A pressure in the air. A shift in temperature. As if someone had just walked by. As if someone were watching. She closed her eyes. And there, in the darkness behind her eyelids, a memory bloomed. Julien's voice, not from the past, but new. If they try to erase me, remember me in the earth. Her hand closed around the violet. And she smiled. Not with joy, but with defiance. Because maybe he was dead. Or maybe he was alive. Maybe they took him. Or maybe he vanished by choice, buried himself so deeply into the roots of resistance that no one could find him. No one but her. She stood, her feet steady on the ground he once walked. She held the pocket watch close to her chest. Then turned toward the cottage. A gust of wind blew from the olive tree. Strong. Warm. It carried the scent of lavender and the echo of footsteps behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because now, she knew. Some roots go so deep, they grow back even after fire. And some love stories don't end. They disappear. And wait to bloom again.